Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for some. I'd like to welcome you everyone to today's chat in the lounge with the Australian Access Federation, the AAF. I'm Fiona Rankin, the board chair of AAF, and I'm coming to you today from Wollongong, New South Wales. I'd firstly like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this event is taking place, and elders both past and present. I also recognise those whose ongoing effort to protect and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures will leave a lasting legacy for the future elders and leaders. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today the AAF panel. In the lounge, we have Heath Marks, the AAF CEO, John Scullen, Head of Projects and Managed Services, Melroy Amida, our Orchid Community Engagement Specialist, and Alina Philippi, AAF COO, who will be also chairing today's panel. And last but certainly not least, we have Richard Northam, one of our AAF board members, coming to you from the far south coast of New South Wales. Richard will be moderating our Q&A session today. I'll hand over to you now, Alina. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for that lovely warm welcome. Welcome to our first AAF chat in the lounge. I'm really excited to be here with some of the team today. And towards the end of the session, you'll have an opportunity to ask the panel some questions. Now, Richard is moderating those questions for us. So if you'd like to pop in a question through the session, go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and there's a little tab there with Q&A, and pop those in. Now, you can also vote on those questions. So if you see a good question in there that you like, please feel free to vote on it, and the most popular ones will move up to the top and probably be the first ones to be answered as well. So thank you everyone for coming. Let's get started. So I'm going to hand over to Heath first. And Heath, I'd love you to tell us a bit about the important services that the AAF offer and why they're so important to the sector.
Great question to kick off today's chat in the lounge. Thanks, Alina. So look, AAF's mission is all about delivering secure access and identity services that connect Australian teachers, students and researchers to global online resources. Now, as part of this, AAF delivers 4 very important key services to the Australian research and education sector. Firstly, the National Authentication Service, which has become known and grown to love as the Access Federation. It's not only connects Australia's research and education organisations, it's also a globally connected service. So it's connected to over 80 federations in operation around the world. So for example, a researcher at the University of Oxford in the UK can use their credentials, their username and password, to access and authenticate to a service back here in Australia. For example, the Murchison Whitefield Array in WA. Now, the next thing that we do in Australia is we're the Orchid Consortium lead. Orchid is a globally unique persistent identifier that connects researchers with their scholarly outputs. So it's pretty cool. We provide a lot of consulting and training for the use of our services, and we spend a lot of time supporting the community on how best to use AAF's products and services. And finally, we have a service called Verified Global. And that service is all about connecting research and industry, research and education with industry through a privacy-preserving verification mechanism. So in addition to this, AAF is part of the Australian government's e-research infrastructure strategy. In particular, we, a few years back, became part of the last research infrastructure roadmap, which is really exciting. And as being part of that roadmap, we were identified as a digital and data e-research platform, DDIR as it's become known as. Now, DDIR also consists of a number of other research infrastructure providers, such as our 2 HPC facilities, NCI and Pawsey, ARNet, our network provider, and the Australian Research Data Commons.
Hey, I noticed that you mentioned that we've been involved in the current 2021 road mapping process. Can you tell us what AAF's engagement has been throughout that process this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, so we've been quite heavily involved within the AAF as part of the road mapping exercise that's been going on throughout this year. The roadmap, and as part of that, is been engaging with the expert working group. The expert working group is made up of leading experts in research infrastructure, as well as the chief scientist. So it's been really great to be engaging through that process and through a number of forums and engagement mechanisms. And AAF has really been communicating about the need for a system-wide approach for trust and identity. And AAF's calling that making the case. That's a particular strategy that we've created. And more information about that is on our website. The other thing we've been doing is we've been working very closely with our digital and data e-research platform providers that I mentioned before about making sure that our products and services are aligned and we all understand what we're doing and how they're interrelated. And really importantly, common messaging around the importance of what we will do and how that comes together. In particular around trust and identity, how pivotal that is within the research infrastructure space. Now, we're waiting for the exposure draft of the research infrastructure roadmap, which hopefully is coming any day soon, which is really, really exciting. And we ask our colleagues to provide us lots of support in communicating the message of how important trust and identity is for research infrastructure.
Yeah, I know we are all anticipating the roadmap exposure draft, so it'll be exciting to see what comes from that. And I know that we'll be responding as well with what opportunities we have. So thank you for those updates, Eve. And John, I think it's time to jump over to you. So there's, so we know that there's been a lot of new legislation coming, well, not a lot, but there's been a few new legislations coming that will probably be impacting the sector. So John, can you tell me a little bit about what opportunities this might provide for the AAF?
Sure, Elena. So there's several pieces of interrelated legislation under development. There's two that I guess are particularly relevant for AAF. The first is the Trusted Digital Identity Bill that's about to go before Parliament. So that's about extending the system behind MyGov, the Trusted Digital Identity Framework, to a whole of economy solution. So that will bring in some accommodations for state government and for commercial organisations as well. So they're all operating off a standard. So obviously that has implications for AAF. We're still working our way through that. The second major piece of legislation is the Data Transparency, the Data Availability and Transparency Act. And that's about trying to make government data that's not open data, so it's got some level of protection. They're trying to make that more accessible to people who need it. So obviously researchers are a very important user of that data. And we're working with the Office of the National Data Commissioner to integrate AAF as part of that solution. So it won't be there in the first deployment, but it will be there for subsequent rollouts, second phases of that activity.
Yeah, look, it's really an interesting legislation, and I know it's something that we are keeping an eye on here at the AAF. So John, the other thing that I'd like to chat with you a little bit more about is AAF's cloud solution known as Rapid IDP. So I know a lot of customers have found this a really valuable product. Can you tell us about the importance of Rapid IDP?
Yeah, so we built Rapid IDP in response to a lot of customer demand. So the identity provider software, that's what Rapid IDP is, connects organisations to the rest of the federation. So everyone needs to operate on those. It's open source software, but it's a fairly bespoke skill set to operate and maintain that. So we've kind of taken that burden off customers. So it's a high availability solution. We take care of all the patching and maintenance and updates for customers. That all happens seamlessly. There's no downtime. We deploy updates. And more recently, we've integrated that with cloud identity solutions like Okta and Azure AD. And that's also been very popular. And that provides the benefits of not only single sign-on to both enterprise applications and federated applications, but also extends the multi-factor authentication services of those applications to federated applications and services too.
Yeah, so John, can you also tell us more about the uptake of Rapid IDP over the last few years as well?
Yeah, so it's really taken off in the last 6 to 12 months. Number of factors there. We invested in business development activities, so that's helped to kick it along. That cloud integrator that I mentioned earlier has also been pivotal, and also the impacts of COVID on universities have helped drive that. So we're now just short of about 50% of identity providers or organisations using it. That includes smaller universities like Bond and Charles Darwin University, right up to CSIRO, Melbourne University, Sydney University, so some pretty major players and research using that product.
Yeah, look, I know that we've had great uptake, and also the feedback we've had from customers has been fantastic as well. Now, for those of you that may have joined the webinar a little bit late, I just want to remind you that you can pop questions into the Q&A tab down the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please feel free to do that. And also Rich is moderating those for us. So if you like any particular questions that are already in there, please don't forget to vote on those as well. And they'll pop them onto the top of the list. Now, we're just going to change topic slightly and start talking a little bit more about ORCID and persistent identifiers. So Melroy, I'm going to jump over to you. I know that AAF has been delivering the ORCID consortium for the past 5 years successfully. Can you tell us a bit about the growth of the consortium over that time?
Yes, so yeah. So when the consortium was launched at the start of 2016, there were around 30,000 ORCID IDs registered in Australia, and about 10% of our members had integrated ORCID with their systems. Now that number is over 150,000 ORCID IDs that are registered in Australia, and the members within the consortium who've integrated ORCID with their systems is 90%. So that's phenomenal growth if you were to look at it over the 5 years. And our message to members still remains the same. It's not, ORCID's not something where you just integrate and then forget about it, but you plan, you develop, you integrate it, and not just with one system, but then you start doing it with other systems, because what that results in is a much richer output when it comes to looking at your national research infrastructure.
Yeah, look, that growth has been exceptional over that time, and something that we've said at the AAF is that ORCID is a lifestyle, so you've got to kind of keep doing the same things over there. It's that plan, develop, integrate, repeat. Now, Melroy, I do have another question for you, and that's a little bit about ORCID and their development. So over the past 12 months, I know ORCID have implemented a lot of new tools. Can you tell us about those tools?
Yes, so last year, ORCID was looking at projects so that they could give more value to all the members of ORCID, and one of the things that they're coming out with now is called the ORCID member portal. The member portal itself is a suite of tools, and what they have at the moment is 2 tools called the affiliation manager. The idea behind affiliation manager is that an organization can assert their researchers' affiliation to themselves, and it can be done by any organization, big or small, without having to jump over a technological or technical barrier. And then you have the reporting dashboard, and the reporting dashboard is really useful because it provides them with the sort of data that organizations would like to then take and make decisions about. So it's quite interesting in how ORCID provide that data. Earlier, it used to be on a month-to-month basis, whereas now it's when you need it, you can log in and get that information. So it's so much more convenient, provides a lot more value.
Yeah, look, that's fantastic. And I know that ORCID are continuing to add to that suite of tools, and that we're also hoping from a national perspective that it will enable the consortium to continue to grow, especially for some of those smaller organisations as well. Now, Melroy, I do have one last question for you at the moment, and that's just about some work that ourselves, the AAF, are doing with ARDC. What we're working on is a persistent identifier cost-benefit analysis report, which I know is a mouthful. But this report we're really excited about, and Melroy, I was hoping you might be able to tell us a little bit more about this report and why it's so important.
Yes, so the cost-benefit analysis report on persistent identifiers is quite important for us when you look at it nationally, because what we would like to see is, yes, we're putting all this money and all this investment into persistent identifiers into ORCID, but what we also want to see is how exactly is it benefiting researchers, is it benefiting the national economy, is it benefiting organizations and the research sector. And the idea behind this is, in the UK, they've just released a similar cost-benefit analysis report for the research sector that looks at how much money would be saved if persistent identifiers were implemented across the research workflow. In Australia, what we would like to do is go one step further and look at not just the amount of money that is saved by implementing persistent identifiers, but also the improved and accuracy of reporting. And then not to mention the time saved when it comes to doing all those national reporting exercises, those are things that would make a lot of difference for our members and for the sector itself.
Yeah, look, it's a really exciting report, and I know that we're hoping to have that completed by mid next year. So that's something we'll be sharing with the sector as well. So John, I'm going to jump back to you. You look after a lot of our external projects and engagements in the e-research space. So can you tell us a bit about the upcoming projects and the projects that we're currently working on?
Yes, Elena, there's 3 at the moment that are on the books, but I'm sure more will be coming in the not too distant future. The first one is Cadre, so that's about providing access to sensitive data, particularly in the humanities, arts and social sciences area. The idea is to build on the concept of the 5 safes framework and to provide a mechanism to streamline access to some of these data sets, to take away some of the manual processing that's currently required to improve access to data. The other 2 projects are related to the Australian Biocommons. So the first is around building an authentication framework that will integrate lots of different providers, genomic sequencing instruments, high performance computing facilities, so some fairly high-end equipment to bring that all together. And the other one is specifically around human genomics informatics platform. So being able to share human genomic data across different data holders, and to being able to assemble a virtual cohort so you can find people with certain types of cancers and certain age groups, to be able to build a research set with data from different data holders. So that's very important. In each case, we're looking at deploying a piece of software called CI Mobile. So that extends the capabilities that AAF currently has. And it's not for everyone, it's a more advanced use case, but these are some fairly sophisticated use cases that we're looking at here. Longer term, it doesn't make sense to have projects do this piecemeal kind of funding of this sort of capability. So this is one of the things we put in the National Infrastructure Roadmap pitch, to try and get a centrally funded national capability involving both infrastructure and people to be able to deploy and operate. So if we keep doing this piecemeal approach, we're not going to have a joined up authentication capability for the country.
Yeah, and look, from a national level, these projects that we're involved with are very interesting, they're very exciting, and they're also looking at cultural and societal problems that we need to assist. And I think one of the good things is with these projects is it's setting up we're piloting some options that might then give the capability to have a national capability in these extended access and authentication and authorization pieces. So
sure.
Now, Heath, I think that segues nicely over to you. Can you give us a bit of an update on what's on the radar for 2022 and beyond?
Certainly can, Alina, and thanks for the question. Look, there are a couple of things that we've got on our radar. As part of our strategic plan and our business plan and what we're looking at in particular for next year. The first is all around data analytics and reporting. We see the need to do greater data analytics and reporting on our services and how they're utilised and how we can better utilise them. So we see this from a couple of angles. One is about delivering more value to our customers and our users of our services, so the universities and research organisations and how they're using AF and its services, but also internally on how we can make better decisions on where we should be focusing our energy and what would be maximise what we can do for our customers. The other thing is all around digital identity, and John mentioned the TDIF framework, the Trusted Digital Identity legislation, and really we see AF looking at how it can expand upon its services into that digital identity space. So one is about what can we do with the emerging legislation and how can we integrate AF services into that and maybe leverage that that trusted digital identity framework between government and education and research. The other thing is we're at the table at the moment and having really strong discussions with industry players like BPay around digital identity and how can that then be integrated between what industry is doing and what education is doing. So we see both of those things as really important as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, and that's probably really important that the AF is continuing to evolve. We're continuing to watch what's happening in our sector, across industry, and also within that government and research space as well. So thank you for that, Heath. Now, we're going to open up to our Q&A session now. So Richard Northam, I'm going to let you open up the line, and Richard's going to go through the Q&A questions that have been coming through, and he's going to direct those through to the panel. I may need to repeat them, but we'll just see how we're working through with those, Richard. So over to you.
No worries. Thanks, Lenny. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got one good question, which is probably initially a question for Heath, but I'm sure John could also comment on this. But what highlights from the roadmap can you share with us? So what are the interesting things about the roadmap and the roadmap process that you might want to share with everyone?
Look, it's been an interesting process. So as I said before, there's the expert working group that's been established to develop the roadmap, and I suppose over the last 6 to 8 months, it's really been around consultations and engagement. So there's been, when we spoke to the roadmap, it was very much, from an AAF's point of view. When we spoke to the roadmapping working group, it's very much from the AAF point of view around the need for a system-wide approach for trust and identity, and the key points around that is very pivotal to underpinning all research infrastructure. And the other areas also around cybersecurity, so we very much see that coming into play as well. There's been lots of discussions, the roadmapping team I know with some of my digital colleagues around HPC, the different tiers of computing, cloud computing, all those different angles there as well. John, any comments from you?
Yeah, so it's been good to see authentication and authorization starting to bubble up as a topic, and it's been a topic of discussion throughout the roadmapping process, which is great to see. I guess one of the consequences of the current structure where funding is really directed at verticals, at disciplines, is that underpinning services like authentication that are shared by everything are kind of a bit left out. So hopefully, it's starting to get more on the agenda, because without some of those foundational capabilities that run across all the discipline areas, it really makes it difficult to join the whole system together and have it working in a similar way.
Yeah, that's correct, John. And look, we have been hearing lots of murmurs and from feedback that trust and identity has been being addressed and raised by some of our colleagues and other capabilities as well. Richard, back to you. Is there any other questions for the panel?
Nothing else in the Q&A session, but one of the things I thought I'd ask is, the AAF has been around for over a decade now. So how does the AAF continue to remain relevant for higher education and research, and how do you keep it relevant?
Anybody want to take that?
That sounds like a
We'll let you kick that one off.
Look, great question. I suppose look a number of ways. One of the I suppose key ways is AF as an organisation is a member-driven organisation which is owned by and for the sector. So we're very closely aligned, and we've got our ear to the ground with what the sector requires. So both within the research infrastructure place, being part of ANCRIS and the ANCRIS strategy, but also being very close and aligned to the universities and what they need in the trust and identity space there. So yeah, even down to the way it's structured. So as an organisation, it's owned by its members, and its board is consisted of representatives from the sector, which is great, as well as external board members as well. We're also heavily linked into what's happening globally. So we're part of a global strategy, which is developing research and education federations and trust and identity and ORCID and persistent identifiers. We're at the table with a number of issues, a number of activities occurring, and we know discussing, what are the issues and how can we solve them as a global community. And I think that has been really, really important, AF's activities that it has played in that space, because we've been able to bring that back and then further refine our strategies there as well. Other things, I suppose, is AF's relevancy has increased significantly in the last 2 to 3 years because of things like the need for improved cybersecurity, around trust and identity, privacy and changes in privacy laws both in Australia and internationally. So the focus on what we do has become so important to what our members do. We are an integral part of the teaching, learning and research infrastructure system here within Australia.
Yeah, and I might just add to that, Heath, as well, that from the federal government and through the research side of things, the need for collaboration with industry and internationalisation of Australian research has been something that's been paramount and on their agenda for a few years now. That's something that the AAF really enables for the research services, is that internationalisation and the ability to connect those services and researchers from a global layer as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, a lot of the AAF has been, and not only the AAF, but federations around the world have been foundational for the whole COVID situation. You know, we've been used for authentication and also the system identifiers, and ORCID has been very much part of global research efforts, and we've enabled authentication into key systems for researchers working on really important research at the moment.
And also, we've been working at it for a long time, but we're finally starting to punch out of just education and research sphere, more into government, more into health. So we've got providers like New South Wales Health connected to the AAF. Queensland Health have recently come on with an application, but we're hoping they'll become an identity provider in the longer term. So just expanding some of the industries and sectors that work closely with education and try and get more innovators in those areas too.
Yeah, I mean, we've just had Prime Minister and Cabinet sign up to the AAF, and they're going through their technical connection of their data
place. That's to support the data availability and transparency,
which is really, really exciting stuff.
Excellent, thanks for that. So I've got another really good question. This will be one for you, John. Is there any update on the ability to manage groups of users across institutions via the AAF?
No real update, other than, so CI Logline is the application that will facilitate that capability. We're doing work through those 3 projects that I talked about to bring that in. We're also having some discussions with the ARDC through more of a HAS, Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences wide solution. So yeah, work carries on, Richard, but it's a fairly expensive piece of software and quite a complex skill set to integrate. So it's not, something that we can just sort of turn on and the job's done. It's going to take quite a lot of work over quite a long period of time.
But you've had some good results through integrating this with the Biocommons and Zero Childhood Cancer and all those sort of groups.
Yeah, so we've validated for ourselves that it solves many or addresses many of the high-end use cases that we haven't been able to service before. And there's a level of confidence both with us and the Biocommons that it will address many of those cases. So we're just about to start work on early next year and bringing that to a production service for Biocommons. And I think once that's in place, we'll have something more concrete that we can show people and demonstrate, start to catch up more from there.
Okay, that's excellent. I mean, it's been a very difficult problem over the many years that I've been involved with the AAF, so it's good to hear that. So we have another question. Are there any plans on expanding membership towards earlier education stages, such as high school students who are having an interaction with universities in their final years?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Richard. We absolutely welcome the expansion of any K-12 or TAFEs colleges, VET, any of those sort of areas. I mean, we do have VET as part of the dual sector universities connected to the AAF. We have had TAFEs in WA, but definitely welcome that discussion, and there would be no reason why we wouldn't say absolutely, please, yeah, let's make it happen.
Yep.
If you've got any particular organisations in mind, just drop us an email. We'll be happy to follow that up.
The use of the AF is slightly different to the universities. They're very much looking at cloud-based services, teaching and learning services, whereas the universities are a combination of teaching, learning and research.
Excellent, no worries, thanks for that. So another question for you. In what ways will the AF bring its expertise to academic, educational and commercial space to help other federations evolve and participate in identity and privacy services in the APAC region?
Maybe I can take that one.
Yeah, sure.
So AAF's had involvement in that for a number of years, actually. So we were involved in setting up the New Zealand Federation, Tuakiri. We've been involved in setting up the Federation in Hong Kong and in Singapore and also Malaysia as well. So Terry Smith, our head of support, has been instrumental in that, and he's also on a number of international working groups that try and elevate and extend some of these capabilities.
No, so we've been involved, Terry's been involved in a couple of programs last year, and it's just last year and this year, which just completed an EU funded program, which was all about advancing federated technologies in the Asia Pacific region, which was a really, really instrumental program. And that's the second iteration of that program, EU funded under the Horizon funding program. The next round of funding has actually been awarded to Malaysia. We actually had an internal discussion, not only internal within the Asia Pacific region, I suppose, is who would be the next lead agent for that activity, and we thought it would be great to get one of our neighbouring countries, emerging countries, to actually take the reins. We feel like we've established it so far. We really need them to take the reins within the community.
And that program has really kick-started federations in places like Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Pakistan. So that they've gone from virtually nothing to many of them are now joint educated and are able to access services in other countries in much shorter than it took places like New Zealand and AAF to do, just because we were finding our way along. We've been able to lead and help those countries move through the process much more quickly.
Excellent. Thanks for that. So there's no more questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to throw a curveball at you. So fast forward 5 or 10 years from now, what do you think identity looks like in higher education and research? The identity that the AAF might be contending with and providing services to its customers?
Yeah, look, this is a great question, Richard, and one that actually we had a little bit of a chat about with the board as well as part of our planning session this year as to where might the AAF head in the next 5 to 10 years. I suppose probably we're looking 5 years, but I think something that we did talk about is our attributes and the fact that that's something that the AAF has that sets us apart and really adds some value for various components. And I know that John and Heath would probably have a little bit more in-depth technical knowledge to explain that more if people wanted to expand that as well. And look, I think some of the other things that are coming is we do have the unique student identifier, the TDIF framework, which is the Trusted Digital Identity Framework. And this is really going to change things on a national level about how people are accessing and using digital IDs, and they will impact the AAF, and hence why we're watching those closely, and we will need to support them, and we will need to support the organisations that are our members and our subscribers to continue to move forward. But guys, do you have any other comments on that as well?
Yeah, it's something we still need to unpick and do some more work on, but the legislation is still, it's not finalised yet, so it's difficult to sort of make firm plans around that. Maybe a role for AAF to act as an identity exchange by bringing existing federated identities and connecting them to that broader whole economy solution. So, I mean, it certainly validates, I guess, some of the principles that AAF endorsed over a decade or more about federating identities and not sticking it all in one place. But yeah, I mean, we've got quite a lot of work ahead of us to understand the full implications of that and work out exactly what our role is.
Yeah, and I think we'll start to see, I mean, just sort of gazing ahead into the future, we'll start to see, a lot more passwordless authentication, which we all know is, sort of here upon us and moving fast. And things around decentralized identity, so self-sovereign identity, where I own the identity as a user, but it gets augmented through the partners that I'm collaborating with or working with or I'm involved with. My identity is with me for life. So, we're seeing a lot of our colleagues internationally in some of the European countries, some of the smaller European countries, where they're working on sort of identity for life systems and platforms where, the identity is linked in not only within education, but also government and library and all sorts of other things, other areas and industry. And the identity stays with an individual basically from birth all the way through.
And follows them as they move from one university to another or from schools to university.
Excellent. Oh, well, look, I think that's all the questions we have. So, Alina, I might hand back to you.
Thank you, Richard. We really appreciate you moderating that for us and throwing those questions at us, even if they were curveballs. So we've only got a few moments left. So I just thought if there was any final thoughts from the panel. So Heath, do you have any quick final thoughts?
Look, I do, and I'm happy to go for the e-research sort of infrastructure lens, especially because we're about to see the exposure draft, the next research infrastructure roadmap, which will be really exciting. I think there are 3 areas that we need to focus on, and with our responses to this exposure draft. The first one is the need for reusable trust and identity components, and I think this is really important for research collaboration. So we can't just have one component; we need many, and they need to be reusable across the ecosystem. The next thing is all around, I think, if we just think around national infrastructure, but that national infrastructure actually has to be truly globally embedded infrastructure, because all research is global, which is really important. And this all needs to be underpinned by safe and secure trust, identity, and cybersecurity. And it really needs that very strong fabric behind it. And finally, I think we really need to focus on system-wide approaches for trust and identity and cybersecurity. And we need to leverage existing frameworks, develop new frameworks, existing policies and processes, and develop new policies and processes to support that as things are evolving.
Yeah, sure. Look, that sounds great. And I think, yeah, AAF has got those things on the radar and moving forward. John, any final thoughts from you?
Only from a legislation point of view, I think it's great to see the federal government starting to adopt and deploy some of the principles that AAF has been about for the last 10 years or so. Obviously, it has some pretty big implications for us that we still need to understand and work through and work out what our role will be in that broader ecosystem. But exciting days ahead.
Thank you, John. And Melroy, any final thoughts from you?
Yes, so I'd like to take an approach towards the persistent identifier lens and look at it that way. What I think the sector as a whole needs to do is look at what our international colleagues are doing and form a national persistent identifier policy, one that actually ties in all the different persistent identifiers together within the research sector itself. But more importantly is also to try and grow our community of practitioners, community of members, especially with regards to ORCID and other persistent identifiers, and encourage government organizations and national funders, as well as research organizations, to implement persistent identifiers at every point in the research life cycle, because what that does is it will only enhance our national research output, and it will make it a better experience for everyone who's involved in the sector.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to our panel for taking some of those questions for us and also for giving us an update today. I would say that is a wrap on today. So if you have any feedback or thoughts that you'd like to pass on to the team, please send those through to our support team and we'll try and get back to you with responses as soon as we can. So thank you everyone for joining us for our first AAF Chat in the Lounge. This is goodbye for now, and we'll hope to see you again in one of these next year. See you everyone.